Today we're going to look at how to keep your database safe with Cloud Firestore security rules. Welcome to DevWorld, my name is Sam. Today we're going to have a look at the Firebase Firestore security rules. What exactly are Firestore rules? Firestore rules are basically your last defense for your database. We can write rules to protect our database from data we don't want. So what does that include? With Firestore we don't have to sanitize our data. This is done by Firestore itself. But we most probably want to validate it. And that's what we can do with those rules. We can also use information from authentication, but more about that in the video. We have two main possibilities to check data. Request.resource.data, which is the incoming data, and resource.data, which is the existing data. So if you want to check data a user wants to add to the database, we check that request.resource.data. And if you want to check something about the data that's already in the database, we check the resource.data object. The last thing before we start with the tutorial is that we write the Firestore rules with a custom Firestore rules language that resembles JavaScript. To show you how the Firestore's rules work, I'll use my Firebase React tutorial. If you haven't seen it and if you're just interested in learning how the Firestore's rules work, don't worry, you will still be able to follow the video if you have basic understanding of JavaScript and Firestore. Furthermore, this tutorial applies not just to React, but everything regarding JavaScript. So if you use another JavaScript framework or vanilla JavaScript, this tutorial still applies to you. So let's get started with writing our rules. We can either write our rules directly here when we go to Cloud Firestore and then to rules, but I recommend to set up a Firebase project in your development environment. So let's go to VS Code, and here I have the development server already running, so let's close that. And what we want to do now is install the firebase-tools globally. So let's click enter. And keep in mind the code for this tutorial is in the description down below and also the commands for the terminal. What we now want to do is log in to Firebase login. Now that we have successfully logged in, we can close that up. And we can see we have successfully logged in as, in my case, Sam from away@gmail.com. And now we want to initialize our Firebase project. We do that with Firebase init. Now we want to select with the spacebar Firestore. If you want more, you could select these two, but let's just click enter here. We want to use an existing project. And now if you would have different projects, it will be listed here, but we have just the school directory, so we click enter again. Here I just take the standard. Now the initialization is complete. We have 4 new files, the Firestore indexes, Firestore rules, Firestore.json, and the Firebase RC. In this video, we're just going to be interested in the Firestore rules. Now we can see there is no syntax highlighting, so what we want to do in VS Code is go to extensions. And we want to install the Firebase syntax highlighter. Now if you go back, we can see it's way more readable. Now the rules here match the rules that we have already in our project. I already applied some rules, but what you would have in the beginning is this rule here. If you initialized your Firestore project with the development rules, then your standard will be these rules, which is completely open for anybody to read or write inside of 30 days after you created the project. But as it says in the comment here, don't use that for production mode. And don't worry about forgetting about that rules. Firebase will send you an email when the 30 days are running out. And here we can already see a timeline of all the rule changes. But as I said in the beginning, we don't want to edit the rules directly here now. So let's go to VS Code. And just to show you how you can actually deploy and change the rules, let's change the rule here to if true. And we can see the latest rules now. If we don't do anything, is still this one. So it's indicated here that these are the current rules. So to change the rules, what we want to do is put in this command, firebase deploy, and then only as a flag, Firestore rules. If you click enter now here, we can see this has been deployed to Firebase successfully. So if you go to our project and refresh the page, we can see the newest version of our rules. All right, let's dive into what these rules now actually do. So first up here, we have the definition of our rules version. There is no real reason to not use the version 2, so this should be mandatory. Then here we define the service Cloud Firestore, and then matches a database, then a database wildcard, and then the first batch of documents. This is standard for any rule. So you can pretty much forget about this up here. This should be standard in your rules. Now what we have here is another match with this expression, which is a wildcard, which refers to all the documents in your database. So all our documents in our data are being allowed to read if true, which means of course that they are allowed to read, and they are allowed to write to if true as well. So let's check that with our app. So let's fire up our development server. And we can see we can read all the documents. We can also write to them. Now this is school new, so we can read and write. So read actually includes get and list, but most of the time we will just refer to that as read, because get is getting a single document read and list is getting a collection of reads. So write includes create, update and delete, which most of the time we will write out because we want different rules for creating, updating and deleting. So usually we don't want to refer to just all documents up here, but we want to refer to a specific collection. So in our Cloud Firestore, we just have our schools collection, but still let's put that in here. We want to match the schools collection, and then we want to have a wildcard, and this works like a variable, so we can put whatever name we want. So in our case, item ID, and this will refer to these item IDs, no matter which ones they are. If you want to have a specific one, we could also do this. But of course, that's not what we want. So if we save now and deploy to our Firebase, first we want to refresh our application, and we can see everything still works. So of course, we most probably don't want that everybody can write and read to our database. So what we can do is restrict access to our database if we say false, and false here too. We save that and deploy to our Firebase. And if you go now to our app and refresh, we can see it doesn't work anymore. And if you go to our console, we can see there is missing or insufficient permission. So of course, this is very strict now. So let's write actual rules that make sense. First, we want that everybody can see the data on our app. And then let's change this to allow write to allow create, update, and delete. And now there's different checks we can do before somebody is able to, for example, create data. This is a typical expression you can see, Request.resource.data.title. And then we check if this is the type string. So we can check that our NoSQL database becomes a little bit more like a SQL database. So let's save that and deploy the rules. Let's go to our application and let's add a document. And we can see our school new 2 has been added. And what we can also do is append the and sign, copy that, and say if request.resource.data.score is string we allow create. Let's deploy the rules again. Now if you go to our app and refresh the page, and we want to add a new school, we can see it doesn't work, missing or insufficient permissions. So why is that? So if you go to our app, we can see in our add schools function that score is a number. So if you now go to our Firebase rules and change that to number and deploy that, now it should work. So let's refresh the page. School 4. Now we can see our school 4 has been added. And that's basically how it works. Of course, this is very, very cumbersome to do it this way, because if you can imagine, if you have an object with many, many keys, you have to write a ton of those expressions. So that's why in the next video, I'm going to show you how to use this tool I made to make that way, way easier. But now for the basics, let's just look at 2 other rules. Especially with the read, we have rules that are used often, which is a rule that you only can read data if you're a logged in user. And for that we can use this. Request.auth is not equal to null. So if we save that and deploy to Firebase, go to our application, refresh, we can see it still works. But if we log out and refresh, we can see we have missing or insufficient permissions and we can't see data anymore. So let's log in. And let's refresh. And now we can see the data again. Another common rule is that users can only read their own data. So in our database, we have the owner ID in our object. So we can use that with this rule. If request.auth.uid equals the resource.data.owner. So with any data request that is sent, there is always an auth object sent as well. And this auth object also contains the user ID, which even if it comes from the client, this one can be trusted because Firebase does a lot of magic in the backend to make sure we can trust this auth object. And then this user ID, which should equal to this ID here for the respective owner, is checked on the other side here with the resource.data.owner, which again is this key in our object. So let's try that out. Let's save that and deploy to Firebase. And now we go to our application, refresh, and we can see it doesn't work even though we're logged in as jim@gmail.com. So why is that? There are also schools that jim@gmail.com or its respective user ID is not the owner of. And with the Firebase rules, we can only check if all or none of these expressions match, and if they don't, access will just be blocked. So what we have to do is, as I said in the video about the queries, we have to work closely with our queries. So if we comment that out, then we only get the data where the owner is the current user ID, which is exactly the same thing that we check up here. But because we use this query, we actually get only the data where the owner is the current user's ID. So if we save that, refresh the page, we can see now it works. Alright, this was it for this video. In the next video, we're going to cover some typical use cases for Firebase Firestore rules that you can use for your next application. So make sure to subscribe to not miss that. As always, if you liked the video, I appreciate a like. And if you have any further questions, just leave me a comment. See you in the next video.